The morning bell rang across Jefferson Middle School, and students moved through the hallways like a slow river. Maya walked with her backpack heavy on her shoulders. She felt the familiar weight of another school day ahead. The cold air from outside still clung to her jacket as she made her way to room 204. Music class was held in a large room at the end of the second-floor hallway. The classroom had tall windows on one side that let in gray morning light. Rows of chairs were arranged in a semicircle facing the front, where a black piano sat like a sleeping giant. Music stands stood scattered around the room, and posters of famous composers hung on the walls. Most of the faces on those posters were old white men with serious expressions. Maya took her usual seat in the back row, near the corner. She liked being there because she could see everything without being seen too much. Other students filed in, talking and laughing. Some were excited about music class, others looked bored or tired. A few boys in the middle row threw paper balls at each other when they thought no one was watching. The classroom smelled like old books and floor polish. The heater made clicking sounds as it warmed up, creating a rhythm of its own. Maya unzipped her backpack and pulled out her notebook. She had written some song lyrics in it last night, but she kept that page hidden. Music was something private for her, something she did not share with most people at school. Stanley walked into the room exactly 3 minutes after the bell. He was a tall man with gray hair and glasses that sat low on his nose. He carried a coffee mug in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. His footsteps were loud and deliberate. Mr. Stanley had been teaching at Jefferson Middle School for 15 years, and he had a reputation. Some students said he was strict. Others used different words when they talked about him in the cafeteria. He set his coffee down on the desk with a thump. The room went quiet. Most students knew better than to keep talking when Mr. Stanley entered. He had a way of looking at people that made them feel small. His eyes would narrow slightly, and his mouth would form a thin line. Maya had seen that look before. Directed at other students, and sometimes at her Mr. Stanley began taking attendance, calling out names in a flat voice. Each student responded with here or present. The routine was mechanical and predictable. When he called Maya's name, she raised her hand slightly and said here in a voice barely above a whisper. He made a mark in his book without looking up. The classroom had about 25 students that semester. Maya was one of only 3 black students in the class. She noticed this every day, not because she wanted to, but because certain moments reminded her. The way some students looked at her when topics about jazz or hip-hop came up. The way Mr. Stanley sometimes made comments that felt pointed, like small needles. Today felt different, though. There was tension in the air that Maya could not quite name. Maybe it was the gray weather outside, or maybe it was the way Mr. Stanley kept glancing around the room with an expression that suggested he was planning something. Maya shifted in her seat, feeling suddenly uncomfortable. The desks were old and scratched with initials and doodles from students who had sat there years before. Maya traced her finger over one carved heart while Mr. Stanley shuffled his papers. She wondered about the person who had carved it, whether they had been happy or sad, whether they had felt invisible like she often did. Other students began to relax a little as Mr. Stanley organized his materials. Whispers started up again in small pockets around the room. Someone dropped a pencil, and it rolled across the floor with a hollow sound. A girl in the front row yawned. Another student stared out the window at the bare trees. Mr. Stanley finally looked up from his papers. He pushed his glasses up and surveyed the class with that narrow-eyed expression. Then he smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that made Maya's stomach tighten. She had learned to recognize that smile. It usually meant someone was about to have a bad day. The room settled into an uneasy silence. Students straightened in their chairs. Maya tucked her notebook back into her backpack. The heater clicked 3 more times. Outside, a crow landed on the windowsill and pecked at the glass before flying away. Mr. Stanley picked up a piece of sheet music from his desk. He held it up so the class could see. It was a piano piece, something classical with lots of notes running up and down the page. Maya could see it from where she sat, even though she was far away. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She did not know why yet, but something told her this moment mattered. The atmosphere in room 204 was thick now. It felt like the moment before a storm when the air pressure changes and animals go quiet. Students glanced at each other. Some sensed that something was about to happen. Others were still lost in their own thoughts. Unaware, Maya gripped the edge of her desk. Her hands were cold. She looked down at her shoes. Worn sneakers that she had gotten from a thrift store. They were clean but old. She suddenly felt very aware of everything about herself, her clothes, her hair, Her position in the back corner, her skin, Mr. Stanley walked slowly toward the center of the room. Still holding the sheet music, his shoes made soft sounds on the linoleum floor. Each step seemed to take forever. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt like minutes. Maya wished she could disappear. She wished the bell would ring early. She wished she was anywhere but here. But she was here in room 204 on a gray morning in late October, and whatever was about to happen had already begun. Mr. Stanley stopped in the middle of the classroom, holding the sheet music like it was some kind of prize. He looked around slowly, his eyes moving from one student to another. Maya felt her breath catch when his gaze swept past her row. She tried to make herself smaller in her seat, hoping to blend into the wall behind her. The silence stretched out like pulled taffy. Students shifted uncomfortably, not knowing what was coming next. A boy named Derek coughed into his hand. Someone's stomach growled loud enough for half the room to hear. A nervous giggle escaped from a girl in the second row, but she quickly covered her mouth. Mister. Stanley cleared his throat. Today we're going to do something different, he announced. His voice had that fake, cheerful tone that teachers use when they think they're being fun but really aren't. I want to see what raw talent looks like. No preparation, no practice. Just pure natural ability. Maya's hands gripped her desk tighter. She had a bad feeling growing in her chest like a dark cloud. Her grandmother always said she had good instincts, that she could sense trouble before it arrived. Right now, those instincts were screaming, Mr. Stanley walked along the rows of students, tapping the sheet music against his palm. You know, people always talk about natural talent, he continued, especially when it comes to music. They say some people are just born with it, born with rhythm, born with soul. The way he said those words made Maya's skin prickle. There was something mocking in his tone, something that felt wrong. A few students glanced at each other with confused expressions. They could feel it too, the strange energy in the room. I've always been curious about that, Mr. Stanley went on, about who really has talent and who just talks about it. He paused dramatically, looking around the room again. So today, we're going to find out. Maya's heart was pounding now. She could hear her pulse in her ears. She wanted to raise her hand and ask to go to the bathroom, to escape before whatever was happening could reach her. But her arm felt frozen. Her whole body felt frozen, Mister. Stanley's eyes landed on Maya. They stayed there, locked on her face. A slow smile spread across his lips. Maya, he said, his voice carrying across the room. Why don't you come up here? 25 pairs of eyes turned to look at her. Maya felt her face grow hot. She shook her head slightly, hoping he would choose someone else. I don't think, she started to say. Come on now, Mr. Stanley interrupted, his voice firmer. Don't be shy, I'm sure you have plenty of natural talent. The way he emphasized those last two words made several students smirk. They sensed something mean was happening, and some of them were already entertained by it. Maya's legs felt like jelly as she stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor with a harsh sound that made her wince. She walked slowly toward the front of the room, each step feeling like she was walking through deep water. Her backpack strap slipped off her shoulder and she caught it. Fumbling nervously when she reached the front, Mr. Stanley handed her the sheet music. She looked down at it. Her hands were shaking so badly that the paper trembled. It was a complicated piece, something by Chopin, full of difficult runs and complex timing. She had actually played it before at home, but he didn't know that. Nobody at school knew she could play piano. Have you ever seen this piece before? Mr. Stanley asked, his voice dripping with false concern. Maya hesitated. If she said yes, he might think she was bragging. If she said no, he might think she was unprepared. Either answer felt like a trap. I've seen some classical music, she said quietly. Wonderful, Mr. Stanley said, gesturing toward the piano. Then this should be interesting. Please take a seat and play this for us. Maya looked at the piano, then back at Mr. Stanley. Then at the sea of faces watching her, some students looked sympathetic. Most looked curious. A few looked amused, like they were watching a YouTube video of someone about to fail at something. I'm not sure I can... Maya began. Oh, I'm sure you'll do fine, Mr. Stanley cut her off again. After all, don't they say music is in your blood? Isn't that what people say? He looked at the class as he said this, and a few students laughed uncomfortably. They didn't fully understand what he meant, but they could feel the cruelty underneath his words. Maya felt tears starting to form behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not cry in front of these people. She would not give Mr. Stanley that satisfaction. She walked to the piano bench and sat down, placing the sheet music on the stand. The piano bench was cold through her jeans. Her fingers hovered over the keys, white and black, clean and untouched. The piano was old but well maintained. She could smell the wood polish, could see her reflection in the glossy black surface. Behind her, she heard whispers. "This is going to be bad," someone muttered. "Why is he doing this?" Another voice asked. "Shh, just watch," a third voice responded. Stanley stood off to the side with his arms crossed, that same unpleasant smile on his face. He looked like someone waiting for a show, expecting entertainment at someone else's expense. He had done this on purpose, Maya realized. He had chosen her specifically, had planned this moment to embarrass her in front of everyone. The room felt too warm now, despite the clicking heater. Maya could feel sweat forming on her forehead. Her mouth was dry. She looked down at the keys and they seemed to blur for a moment. She blinked hard, trying to focus. "Whenever you're ready," Mr. Stanley said, his voice patient but mocking. "We're all waiting to hear your natural talent." More snickers from the class. Maya's jaw clenched. She thought about her grandmother, who had taught her piano in their small living room. Her grandmother who had survived so much worse than this, who had faced real hatred and real danger. Her grandmother who always told her, "Baby, don't let anyone make you feel small. You are mighty. You are strong." Maya took a deep breath. The keys waited for her touch. The sheet music stared back at her with its complicated notation. The classroom held its breath. And somewhere deep inside, Maya felt something shift. Fear began to transform into something else, something harder, something determined. She placed her fingers on the keys, feeling their smooth surface. The moment stretched out, fragile and heavy. Everything was about to change. Maya's fingers rested on the piano keys but would not press down. They felt frozen there, caught between wanting to run away and needing to stay. The silence in the room had changed from curious to uncomfortable. Students were starting to shift in their seats, wondering what was taking so long, wondering if she even knew how to play at all. Her mind was racing in 1,000 directions at once. She thought about the last time she had felt this exposed, this vulnerable. It was in 3rd grade when a teacher had asked her to read aloud, and she had stumbled over words because she was nervous. The class had laughed, and she had spent the rest of that year trying to be invisible. That memory mixed with other memories now. All the small moments when people had looked at her and seen something less. The time at the grocery store when a woman clutched her purse tighter as Maya walked past. The time a store clerk followed her through the aisles assuming she was stealing. The time her previous music teacher had seemed surprised when Maya answered a question correctly about Mozart. These memories were like weights tied to her ankles, pulling her down, making it hard to breathe, making it impossible to move her fingers. She stared at the black and white keys and they seemed to mock her. They seemed to ask, "Who do you think you are? What made you think you belonged here?" Behind her, Mr. Stanley cleared his throat impatiently. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice carrying that false concern again. "Do you not know how to play after all?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Some students giggled nervously. Maya felt her cheeks burning with shame. She wanted to stand up and walk out, wanted to tell Mr. Stanley exactly what she thought of him, but her voice was trapped somewhere deep in her throat. Locked behind years of being taught to be polite, to not make waves, to not cause trouble. Her grandmother's piano sat in their living room at home. It was an old upright with chipped keys and a slightly out-of-tune middle C. Her grandmother had bought it years ago from a church that was closing down. She had saved for months to afford it, skipping meals sometimes to put money aside. Maya had started learning piano when she was 6 years old. Her grandmother would sit beside her on the bench, guiding her small fingers to the right keys. "Music is freedom, baby," her grandmother would say. "When you play, you're telling your own story. Nobody can take that away from you, but sitting here now, in room 204 with all these eyes on her and Mr. Stanley's mocking smile behind her, Maya felt like everything was being taken away. Her story, her music, her dignity. She felt like she was being erased, turned into a joke for other people's amusement. Her hands started to tremble more noticeably now. The sheet music blurred as tears threatened to spill from her eyes. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry. She bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste copper. The pain helped her focus, helped her stay present. "Maybe this is too advanced," Mr. Stanley said to the class, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe we should start with something simpler. Do you know Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Maya?" Laughter erupted from several students. Not everyone laughed. Some looked uncomfortable. A girl named Sarah in the third row frowned and whispered something to her friend, but enough students laughed to make the moment sting. To make Maya feel even smaller, she thought about standing up and walking out. She imagined herself rising from the bench with dignity, handing back the sheet music and returning to her seat without a word. But she knew what would happen then. The story would spread through the school. "Did you hear about that girl who couldn't even try?" They would say she was too scared, too incapable, too afraid. Maya looked down at her hands still resting on the keys. These were her grandmother's hands, too. The same long fingers, the same broad palms. Her grandmother had picked cotton as a child in the South before her family moved north. Those same hands that had been forced to work in fields had later learned to create beauty on piano keys. "We're waiting," Mr. Stanley said, his patience clearly wearing thin. He wanted his show, his moment of entertainment at her expense. He wanted to prove whatever point he was trying to make about talent, about natural ability, about who deserved to be in his classroom. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the staring faces, the mocking teacher, the cold classroom. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she heard her grandmother's voice. "You are mighty. You are strong." The words echoed through her mind like a song. She remembered nights sitting at the piano at home, playing until her fingers ached. Her grandmother would be in the kitchen making dinner, and the smell of cooking would mix with the sound of music. Those were the moments when Maya felt most herself, most alive, most free. She remembered the feeling of getting a difficult passage right after practicing it dozens of times. The satisfaction of hearing the notes flow together smoothly, creating something beautiful from what had been broken and stumbling. Music was work, it was discipline, it was dedication. It wasn't something you were just born with. It was something you earned. Maya opened her eyes. The classroom came back into focus. The piano waited. The keys seemed less mocking now, more familiar. They were just keys after all, just tools. It was what she did with them that mattered. She looked at the sheet music again. Really looked at it this time. She recognized the piece now. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. She had played it before, not perfectly, but well enough. Her grandmother loved this piece, called it music that sounds like moonlight. Her hands were still shaking, but less violently now. She took a deep breath, then another. The air felt cool in her lungs. She straightened her back, adjusting her posture the way her grandmother had taught her. "Sit up tall, baby, like you're wearing a crown, Mr." Stanley made an exasperated sound. "Today would be nice," he said sharply. Something hardened inside Maya at that moment. Something clicked into place like a key turning in a lock. She was tired of being small, tired of being afraid, tired of letting people like Mr. Stanley decide what she could or couldn't do. She was tired of apologizing for existing. Her fingers pressed down on the first key. The first note rang out softly into the silence, a single E-flat that seemed to hang in the air like a question mark. Maya held it for a moment, letting it fade naturally, feeling the vibration travel through her fingertips, up her arms into her chest. That one note was both an ending and a beginning. She pressed the next key, then the next. The opening measures of the nocturne were slow and gentle. Like footsteps in fresh snow, her fingers moved with careful deliberation. Finding their way across the keyboard, the shakiness in her hands began to smooth out as muscle memory took over. Her body remembered what her mind had almost forgotten. In the classroom behind her, the laughter had stopped. Students sat quietly now, waiting to see what would happen. Some expected her to fail spectacularly, to hit wrong notes and stumble through the piece. Others were simply curious, their attention genuinely caught by the sound. Maya kept her eyes on the sheet music, but she barely needed it. She had played this piece so many times at home that her fingers knew the path. They knew which keys to press, how hard, how long. The music was stored somewhere deeper than her conscious mind, tucked away in the space where repeated action becomes instinct. The nocturne flowed from under her hands like water from a tap. Steady and clear, the melody line sang out above the accompanying chords, romantic and melancholic in the way Chopin's music always was. It sounded like longing, like remembering something beautiful that was lost. Mr. Stanley's expression began to change. The mocking smile faltered slightly, his arms uncrossed and dropped to his sides. He had expected her to stumble after a few notes, to give up embarrassed and defeated. He had not expected this. He had not expected competence, and certainly not grace. Maya's breathing synchronized with the music. Each phrase matched an inhale or exhale. Her grandmother had taught her that. Music breathes just like you do, baby. You have to breathe with it, not against it. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice over the sound of the piano, guiding her through the difficult passages. The piece moved into a more complex section where the left hand had to jump across the keyboard while the right hand maintained the melody. Maya's hands moved independently, each doing their own task while working together. It was like rubbing your stomach and patting your head at the same time, except much more complicated. A few notes wavered slightly. Her nervousness still sat in her stomach like a stone, making some passages less smooth than they would be at home. But she pushed through, recovering quickly, adjusting her tempo to accommodate the mistakes without letting them derail the entire performance. In the third row, a boy named Marcus leaned forward in his seat. His eyebrows raised in surprise. He had sat next to Maya in English class for 3 months and never heard her speak more than a few words. Now here she was, pulling this complex music out of an old-school piano like a magician pulling scarves from a hat. Sarah, the girl who had frowned earlier, felt her chest tighten with emotion. The music was genuinely beautiful. It made her think of her own grandmother who had passed away last year. She found herself blinking back unexpected tears. Even Derek, who had been throwing paper balls earlier, sat still now, his usual restlessness quieted by the sound. He didn't know anything about classical music, thought it was boring old people stuff. But something about the way Maya played made it feel different. Made it feel alive. Maya's confidence grew with each passing measure. The fear that had paralyzed her moments ago began to dissolve, replaced by something stronger, something that felt like power. She realized that she was good at this, that the hours spent practicing in her living room had actually meant something, that all those scales and exercises had built something real. Her fingers moved faster now, more assured. The music swelled and receded like ocean waves, building toward moments of intensity before pulling back into quietness. The dynamic contrast made the piece breathe, made it tell a story without words. Mr. Stanley stood frozen, watching. His face had gone from mocking to blank to something almost like shock. He glanced at the sheet music, then back at Maya's hands, then at her face. He seemed to be recalculating something in his mind, adjusting assumptions he had made without evidence. The classroom felt different now. The atmosphere had shifted from uncomfortable anticipation to something approaching awe. Students who had been slumped in their seats sat up straighter. Those who had been looking at their phones or doodling in notebooks stopped and listened. The music demanded attention. Maya felt herself relaxing into the performance. Her shoulders dropped away from her ears, her jaw unclenched. She even closed her eyes for a brief moment during a passage she knew by heart, trusting her hands to find the right keys without visual guidance. When she opened her eyes again, she felt more present, more solid. She thought about all the reasons she loved music. It was the one place where she could express things she didn't have words for, all the anger, sadness, joy, and hope that churned inside her could pour out through her fingertips and transform into something beautiful, something others could understand without explanation. The piece moved through its middle section, where minor and major keys danced together. Creating tension and resolution, Maya leaned into these moments. Emphasizing the emotional shifts, she was no longer just playing the notes on the page. She was interpreting them, making them her own. Her grandmother always said that the difference between playing music and making music was intention. Anybody can hit keys, she would say. But making music means you put your soul into it. You give it meaning. Maya was giving it meaning now. She was making music. The faces of her classmates began to blur in her peripheral vision. They became less important, less threatening. What mattered was the conversation happening between her hands and the piano, between the composer who had written these notes almost 200 years ago and this girl playing them now in a middle school classroom. Mr. Stanley shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His discomfort was visible now. He had created this situation expecting one outcome and was getting something completely different. He was like someone who had set a trap and accidentally caught something magnificent instead of the pest he had intended. Maya's heart still pounded, but not from fear anymore. It pounded from exertion, from the physical and emotional effort of performance. Her arms were beginning to tire slightly from holding proper form. But she pushed through, determined to finish what she had started. The music built toward its climax, the moment where everything intensified before the gentle resolution. Maya's fingers flew across the keys, executing the rapid passages that had taken her weeks to learn. They weren't perfect, but they were hers. They were real and honest and full of effort. She was almost there now. Almost through it, the end was in sight. The music changed as Maya's confidence grew. What had started tentative and careful now flowed with increasing authority. Her fingers moved across the keys with growing certainty, dancing through the complex passages like they had done this 1,000 times before, because they had, just not here, not in front of people, not with so much at stake. The transformation was not just in the sound. It was in Maya herself. Her posture shifted as she played. Her spine straightened further, her shoulders relaxed completely. The tension that had made her body rigid and small melted away with each passing measure. She was no longer a frightened girl trying to survive an embarrassing moment. She was a musician doing what musicians do in the classroom. Something remarkable was happening among the students. The few who had been whispering or fidgeting fell completely silent. Derek stopped bouncing his leg, a nervous habit he usually couldn't control. Sarah leaned forward with her elbows on her desk, her chin resting on her hands, completely absorbed. Marcus found himself holding his breath during a particularly delicate passage, releasing it only when the music resolved. The emotional weight of Chopin's Nocturne filled every corner of room 204. It crept into the spaces between desks and chairs, wrapped itself around the students like an invisible embrace. The music spoke of longing and beauty, of sadness and hope intertwined. It told a story that everyone could understand even if they couldn't put words to it. A girl named Jennifer, who usually spent music class counting minutes until it ended, found her eyes getting wet. She didn't even know why. She had never cried over music before. Didn't think she was the type. But something about the way Maya played reached inside her chest and squeezed. It reminded her of something she couldn't quite name, a feeling she had forgotten she could feel. The music swelled into its most passionate section, where the dynamic shifted from soft and intimate to powerful and declarative. Maya leaned into this moment, her fingers pressing the keys with more force. Drawing out the full sound of the piano, the instrument responded to her touch like it had been waiting for her all along. Mr. Stanley's face had gone through several transformations. The mocking smile was long gone, replaced first by surprise, then by confusion, and now by something that looked uncomfortably like shame. He had made a terrible miscalculation. He had tried to humiliate someone based on assumptions and prejudices, and instead he was witnessing genuine talent, undeniable skill. The reality of what he had done began to settle on him like dust. He glanced around the classroom, seeing the rapt attention on his students' faces. They were not laughing, not mocking. They were genuinely moved by what they were hearing. Some had expressions of pure wonder, others looked contemplative, lost in their own thoughts triggered by the music. This was not the outcome he had orchestrated. Maya felt the shift in the room even though her back was to everyone. She could sense the change in energy, the way the atmosphere had transformed from hostile to receptive. It was like the air itself had become different, softer somehow, more welcoming. This awareness fueled her performance, gave her additional courage. She thought about her grandmother as she played, pictured her sitting in their living room listening, nodding along with the rhythm. That imagined presence gave Maya strength. Her grandmother had survived Jim Crow laws and segregation, had worked twice as hard for half the recognition, had taught herself piano when most people said she was too old to learn. If her grandmother could persevere through all that, Maya could certainly finish this piece. The Nocturne moved through its final development. Where themes introduced earlier returned in new forms, Maya emphasized these callbacks, showing through her interpretation that she understood the structure of the piece. This wasn't random key pressing. This was thoughtful, informed performance. Her left hand executed a series of difficult leaps across the lower register, while her right hand maintained the singing melody in the upper range. The coordination required was significant. Both hands had to work independently while staying perfectly synchronized. It was like patting your head and rubbing your stomach, except much more complex and beautiful. A boy named Thomas, who played guitar in a garage band, felt a surge of respect. He had always dismissed classical music as boring, something old people listened to, but watching Maya play, seeing the technical skill required, hearing the emotion conveyed, he realized how wrong he had been. This was every bit as challenging and meaningful as the rock music he loved. The classroom windows caught the gray daylight outside, but inside room 204 it felt warm now. The music created its own atmosphere, its own weather. Students who had been strangers to Maya, who had barely noticed her existence before, now watched her with new eyes. She was no longer invisible, no longer just another quiet kid in the back row. Maya could feel sweat on her forehead from the concentration and physical exertion. Her arms ached slightly from maintaining proper form. Her fingers were starting to tire from the constant movement, but she pushed through, determined to finish strong. The end was approaching, just a few more measures. The music built one final time, gathering intensity like a wave rising before it breaks. Maya gave everything to these final moments, pouring all her emotion into the keys. All the fear and anger and sadness she had felt, all the determination and pride and hope, everything flowed out through her fingertips and became sound. Mr. Stanley stood completely still now, his arms hanging at his sides, his face unreadable. He looked like someone who had just been told something shocking and was still processing the information. The confidence he had walked into class with had evaporated, replaced by visible discomfort. The nocturne began its descent toward resolution, the tension easing, the music becoming softer and more introspective. Maya followed Chopin's instructions, letting the volume decrease naturally, allowing the piece to wind down like a music box slowly stopping. Her fingers found the final chords, pressing them gently, letting each note ring out clearly before adding the next. The ending of the nocturne was simple but profound. Just a few quiet notes that felt like someone sighing contentedly after a long journey. Maya played the very last note, a soft E-flat that mirrored the opening. Bringing the piece full circle, she held it. Let it sing out into the classroom, let it fade naturally until it disappeared into silence. Her hands remained on the keys for a moment, frozen in the final position. The silence that followed was complete and profound. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The silence stretched out like glass, fragile and clear. Filling every inch of room 204, Maya sat frozen at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys where the final note had been. Her heart hammered in her chest so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. She was afraid to turn around, afraid to see their faces, afraid to discover that somehow she had failed despite finishing the piece. Her mind raced with doubts. Maybe they were silent because it was bad. Maybe they were embarrassed for her. Maybe Mr. Stanley was preparing some cutting remark that would destroy this moment entirely. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice, 3 times. Each tick seemed louder than it should be, amplified by the absolute quiet. Outside the windows, a bird flew past, its shadow briefly crossing the gray light. The heater clicked off, having reached its target temperature. These small sounds seemed enormous in the stillness. Maya's hands trembled as she slowly lifted them from the keys. She placed them in her lap, gripping her knees to stop the shaking. Sweat had formed on her palms and on her forehead. A drop ran down her temple, but she didn't wipe it away. She was too afraid to move, too afraid to break whatever spell had fallen over the classroom. Mr. Stanley stood where he had been standing throughout the performance. About 10 feet to the left of the piano, his mouth was slightly open, like he had been about to say something, but forgot what it was. His eyes were fixed on Maya's back, wide and unblinking. The sheet music he had given her earlier lay forgotten on his desk. Pages slightly crumpled from when he had held them too tightly, in the 4th row. A girl named Ashley realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out slowly, carefully, not wanting to be the first person to make a sound. Her hands were clasped together in her lap so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She felt tears on her cheeks and was surprised to find them there. She hadn't even realized she was crying. Sarah in the 3rd row had her hand pressed against her chest. She could feel her heart beating fast beneath her palm. The music had affected her in a way she couldn't explain. It had reached inside her and touched something she didn't know existed. She wanted to say something, to thank Maya somehow, but her voice felt trapped. Marcus leaned back in his chair, stunned. He had expected maybe a few stumbling notes, a nervous attempt, something to laugh about later in the cafeteria. Instead, he had witnessed something real, something beautiful, something that made him feel small in a good way, like standing in front of the ocean. Derek's paper balls sat forgotten on his desk. His usual restlessness had vanished completely during the performance. Now he sat motionless, processing what he had just heard. He thought about his own grandmother, who used to sing hymns while cooking. She had died 2 years ago. Somehow Maya's playing had brought back that memory, had made him miss his grandmother with sudden, sharp intensity. Jennifer, who had felt tears earlier, now had them streaming freely down her face. She didn't bother wiping them away, didn't feel embarrassed by them. The music had cracked something open inside her, some place where she kept feelings locked away. She felt raw and vulnerable and strangely grateful. Thomas, the guitar player, sat with his arms crossed, but not in a defensive way, more like he was hugging himself. He was rethinking everything he thought he knew about music, about talent, about the quiet girl in the back row he had never bothered to notice before. He felt respect growing in his chest. Genuine and unexpected, the silence continued. It had been maybe 7 seconds now, though it felt like 7 years. Maya could feel the weight of all those eyes on her back, could sense the attention focused on her like a spotlight. She wanted to disappear, wanted to run, wanted this moment to be over, but she also wanted it to last forever. Wanted to hold on to this feeling of having accomplished something real. Mr. Stanley's face had gone through several transformations during the silence. The shock was fading now, replaced by something more complicated. There was embarrassment there, clearly visible in the red creeping up his neck. There was shame in the way his shoulders slumped forward slightly. There was also something that might have been respect. Grudging and uncomfortable but real, he had tried to humiliate Maya, had put her in this position expecting to prove some ugly point about who belonged and who didn't, about who had real talent and who just talked about it. He had been so certain of the outcome, so confident in his assumptions, and he had been completely, utterly wrong. The silence was becoming unbearable now. Someone had to break it. Someone had to say something or do something to release the tension that had built up like water behind a dam. The moment hung there, balanced on a knife's edge, ready to tip in any direction. Maya finally gathered the courage to turn around. She moved slowly, rotating on the piano bench to face the classroom. Her eyes were downcast at first, looking at the floor, at her shoes, at anything but the faces of her classmates. She could feel her face burning with a mixture of embarrassment and something else. Something that felt dangerously close to pride. Some looked moved, some looked confused, trying to reconcile the girl they had ignored for months with the musician they had just heard. Mr. Stanley was looking at her too, and their eyes met for a brief second. In that glance, something passed between them. An understanding, an acknowledgement. He knew that she knew what he had tried to do, and she could see that he knew he had failed. That he had done something cruel, and it had backfired spectacularly. The silence stretched for one more impossible second. The whole room held its breath, waiting for whatever would come next. The moment felt frozen in time like a photograph, like something that would be remembered long after this day ended. Maya sat on the piano bench, her hands in her lap, her face flushed, her eyes finally meeting the gaze of her classmates. And then, finally, the silence broke. The silence shattered like dropped glass. Sarah was the first. Her hands came together in a sharp clap that echoed through the room. Then another student joined, then another. Within seconds, the entire classroom erupted into applause. The sound was thunderous, filling every corner of room 204, bouncing off the walls and windows, 25 pairs of hands coming together in appreciation. In surprise and genuine respect, Maya sat frozen on the piano bench, unable to process what was happening. Her eyes went wide, her mouth opened slightly in shock. She had expected many things, but not this. Not applause, not this overwhelming response. The sound washed over her like a wave, warm and unexpected. Several students weren't just clapping, they were standing up. Marcus pushed his chair back and rose to his feet. Still clapping, his face split in a wide grin. Jennifer stood next to him, tears still streaming down her face. Her applause enthusiastic despite the emotion. Derek jumped up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled. A piercing sound of approval. Sarah stood and started clapping harder, her hands raised above her head. She was smiling so wide it looked like her face might split. "That was amazing!" she called out over the noise. Her voice broke the informal rule that applause should be silent, and suddenly other students felt free to speak too. "Holy crap, Maya!" Thomas shouted from his seat, still clapping. "Where did that come from?" "That was beautiful," Ashley said, her voice soft but carrying in a brief gap in the noise. She wiped at her wet cheeks, not embarrassed by her tears, just moved by what she had witnessed. The applause continued, wave after wave of it. Maya felt her eyes filling with tears, but these were different from the tears she had fought back earlier. These were tears of relief, of joy, of something like disbelief. She had done it. She had survived the moment that was meant to destroy her and had somehow turned it into this. More students stood up until nearly the whole class was on their feet. The standing ovation felt surreal, like something from a movie. Not something that happened in a Tuesday morning music class at Jefferson Middle School. But it was happening. It was real. The sound of their appreciation filled Maya's ears and her heart. Mr. Stanley stood off to the side, still frozen in place. His hands hung at his sides, not clapping. His face had gone from red to pale, the color draining as he watched his students respond with such genuine enthusiasm. He looked like a man who had just realized he had made a terrible mistake, a mistake witnessed by 25 people, The applause began to fade naturally after about 30 seconds. Though it felt like hours to Maya, students started sitting down again. Still talking excitedly to each other, the energy in the room had completely transformed. Where there had been tension and discomfort, now there was excitement and warmth, dude. "I didn't know you could play like that," Derek said to Maya, his voice carrying across the room. "That was seriously incredible. You've been hiding that from us?" Marcus added, shaking his head in amazement. "That's not fair, Maya. You're like secretly amazing." Maya tried to speak, but her throat was tight with emotion. She managed a small smile, a tiny nod of acknowledgement. Her hands were still shaking, now from adrenaline and overwhelming feeling rather than fear. Mr. Stanley finally seemed to regain some control of himself. He cleared his throat loudly, trying to reclaim authority over his classroom. The sound cut through the chatter. Students quieted down, but slowly, reluctantly. They wanted to keep talking about what they had just witnessed. "Well," Mr. Stanley began, his voice rougher than usual. He cleared his throat again. "That was certainly unexpected." The words came out awkward, stilted. He seemed to be struggling to find the right thing to say. The classroom waited. Students looked between Mr. Stanley and Maya. Sensing that something important was about to happen, the teacher walked closer to the piano, each step seeming to require effort. When he stood in front of Maya, he looked down at her, then away, then back again. He started, then stopped. His jaw worked as if chewing on words. "I owe you an apology." "Maya." The words seemed to cost him something to say. His professional pride, maybe. His sense of authority. "That was genuinely skilled, genuinely beautiful. I was wrong to put you on the spot like that." The classroom was silent again. But this silence was different. It was attentive, focused. Students leaned forward to hear better. This was not something they expected to witness. A teacher apologizing, admitting fault. "You clearly have real talent," Mr. Stanley continued, his voice getting slightly stronger. "Significant talent I should not have." "I should have asked first, I should have," he trailed off. Seeming unable to finish the thought, Maya looked up at him. Her expression was guarded, uncertain. She could hear the apology, but she could also remember the mockery in his voice earlier. The cruel smile on his face, the way he had tried to humiliate her. An apology didn't erase that. Didn't make it okay, but it was something. "A small acknowledgement, thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. It was all she could manage. "All she could offer in this moment, mister?" Stanley nodded. He looked relieved that she had responded at all. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, and his curiosity seemed genuine now. "Not mocking, my grandmother," Maya said, her voice getting slightly stronger. "She's been teaching me since I was 6. "Well, she's an excellent teacher," Mr. Stanley said. "You should be very proud of what you can do," Maya nodded. She was proud for the first time in this classroom. Maybe for the first time in this school, she allowed herself to feel proud without qualification. Without shame, she had earned this moment. "Thank you for sharing that with us," Mr. Stanley said formally. "You may return to your seat." Maya stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs. She picked up her backpack from where she had left it and walked back toward her corner seat. As she moved through the rows, something unexpected happened. Students reached out to touch her arm, her shoulder, offering small gestures of connection and congratulation. "That was so good," someone whispered. "You're amazing," another voice said. Sarah caught her eye and smiled. A real smile full of warmth, Maya smiled back, feeling something loosen in her chest. When she reached her desk and sat down, the chair felt different. The whole room felt different. She felt different. The atmosphere in room 204 had fundamentally changed. Maya was no longer invisible, no longer just another quiet kid in the back. She was seen now, recognized, respected, and while Mr. Stanley's apology couldn't erase what he had tried to do, the response of her classmates gave her something more valuable. She belonged here. Her talent had proven that. Her courage had proven that, and nothing could take that away. The rest of the music class that day felt like a dream, Mr. Stanley attempted to continue with his planned lesson. Something about rhythm notation and time signatures, but nobody could really focus. The energy in the room had shifted too dramatically. Students kept glancing at Maya, whispering to each other, replaying what they had witnessed in their minds. When the bell finally rang, signaling the end of class, students gathered their belongings slowly, reluctant to leave. Several approached Maya's desk before heading to their next period. Sarah was first. She stood in front of Maya with a genuine smile. Hey, I know we don't really talk much, but that was seriously incredible. Would you maybe want to eat lunch together sometime? Maya looked up, surprised by the offer. Yeah, I'd like that, she said, her voice still soft but steadier than before. Marcus and Derek stopped by next. Yo, Maya? We're starting a music club after school, Marcus said. Just like informal jam sessions and stuff. You should totally come. We could really use someone who actually knows what they're doing. Derek nodded enthusiastically. For real, we're all just messing around. But you could probably teach us some actual stuff. Maya felt warmth spreading in her chest. These were invitations. Real connections being offered. Maybe, she said. Then smiled slightly. Okay, yeah, I'll think about it. As students filed out, Mr. Stanley remained at his desk, organizing papers with unusual focus. His movements were stiff, mechanical. Maya packed her backpack slowly, unsure whether to leave quickly or say something. When she finally stood to go, Mr. Stanley looked up. Maya, he called out. Stopping her, she turned, her hand gripping her backpack strap. He walked toward her, stopping a respectful distance away. I wanted to say again, I'm truly sorry for putting you in that position. It was unprofessional and unkind. Maya studied his face. Looking for sincerity, she found it there, mixed with embarrassment and something that might have been shame. Okay, she said simply. I'd like to make it right. If I can, Mr. Stanley continued, would you be interested in performing at the winter concert? A solo piece of your choosing? I think the school should hear what you can do properly this time without the circumstances of today. Maya considered this. Part of her wanted to refuse, to keep her music private and safe. But another part, the part that had just played Chopin in front of 25 people and survived, that part wanted to say yes. I'll think about it, she said. Mr. Stanley nodded. That's fair. Take your time, and Maya, for what it's worth. You reminded me today why I became a music teacher in the first place. To witness talent like yours, to help nurture it. Thank you for that. Maya didn't know what to say to that. So she just nodded and left, walking through the hallways toward her next class. She noticed something different. Students who had been in music class were telling others about what happened. She heard snippets of conversation as she passed. You should have heard her. It was insane. I didn't even know she could play piano, Mr. Stanley looked like he'd seen a ghost by lunchtime. The story had spread through a significant portion of the school. Maya found herself the center of attention in a way she had never experienced before. It was overwhelming, but not entirely unpleasant. She sat at her usual table in the cafeteria, and for the first time, other students asked to join her. Sarah sat down with her tray, followed by a girl from art class, then 2 boys from her English class. Is it true you played some really hard classical piece perfectly? One of the boys asked. Not perfectly, Maya said honestly. But I played it. That's so cool, the art class girl said. I didn't know we had anyone here who could play like that. The conversation flowed naturally. Easier than Maya expected, they asked about her grandmother, about how long she had been playing, about what other pieces she knew. Maya found herself talking more than she usually did, sharing parts of herself she normally kept hidden. Over the following days and weeks, things continued to change, Mr. Stanley was noticeably different in music class. He asked students about their interests, listened to their ideas, involved them in choosing repertoire. He created opportunities for anyone who wanted to perform to do so, without pressure or mockery. The atmosphere in room 204 became warmer, more collaborative. Maya joined the informal music club that Marcus and Derek had mentioned. It met every Thursday after school in an empty classroom. Students brought guitars, keyboards, even a portable drum kit. They jammed together, shared songs they liked, taught each other what they knew. Maya showed them basic music theory, helped them understand chord progressions and scales. She discovered that teaching was something she enjoyed. Watching someone's face light up when they understood a concept. When their fingers finally found the right keys, it gave her a feeling of purpose. Mr. Stanley heard about the music club and offered official support. He got them access to the music room and its better equipment. He even stayed after school sometimes to supervise, though mostly he just sat at his desk and let them work. Maya noticed him watching sometimes with an expression of satisfaction. When December came, Maya agreed to perform at the winter concert. She chose another Chopin piece, the Fantasy Impromptu, something challenging but beautiful her grandmother came to watch, sitting in the front row with tears of pride streaming down her face. The performance went well, not perfectly. Maya made a few small mistakes, but she recovered gracefully. The audience applauded warmly, and this time Maya smiled, accepting the appreciation without fear or doubt. After the concert, students from other grades approached her, asking questions, expressing admiration. Teachers she had never spoken to congratulated her. The principal mentioned something about applying for music scholarships when she got to high school, but the most meaningful moment came from her grandmother. After the concert, in the parking lot under the December stars, her grandmother hugged her tight. "Baby, I am so proud of you, not just for playing beautifully, but for being brave. For standing up in that moment and showing them who you really are." Maya hugged her back, breathing in the familiar scent of her grandmother's perfume. "You taught me," she said. "You taught me that music is freedom, that nobody can take it away." "That's right," her grandmother said, pulling back to look at Maya's face. "And now you're teaching others that same lesson. Look at you, baby. Making a difference." The experience in room 204 that October morning became a turning point. Not just for Maya, but for many people who witnessed it. Mr. Stanley became a better teacher, more thoughtful, more aware of his assumptions and prejudices. Students learned that talent exists in unexpected places, that quiet people can hold extraordinary gifts. Maya learned the most important lesson of all. She learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to act despite it. She learned that her voice mattered, that her music mattered, that she mattered. The piano in room 204 got more use after that day. Other students, inspired by Maya's example, asked to try it. Mr. Stanley started a beginner piano workshop during lunch. Several students discovered they loved it. The school's music program grew stronger, more vibrant, more inclusive. Years later, Maya would look back on that day as the moment everything changed. The moment she stopped hiding, stopped making herself small, stopped apologizing for taking up space. It was the day she discovered that her grandmother was right all along. She was mighty, she was strong, and her music could change the world.